6 days. That's 144 hours. For an 8-year-old girl, alone in the wilderness wearing just a flimsy bathing suit, it's an eternity. When little Katherine Van Alst vanished into Devil's Den State Park back in 1946, nobody thought she'd make it. The odds? Impossibly slim. But then she walked out. No tale of terror, just a calm, simple statement that's echoed through decades of mystery. Here I am. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of the most baffling survival stories you'll ever hear. Devil's Den State Park. It's this sprawling, rugged piece of the Ozark wilderness in Arkansas, a place of stunning natural beauty. Think ancient mountains, lush forests, and a maze of sandstone caves, deep ravines, and imposing bluffs. People have been drawn to its wild embrace for generations, looking for adventure, looking for peace. But beneath that pretty surface, there's a history filled with shadows and secrets, a place that's definitely lived up to its ominous name more than once. It was June 1946 when this park set the stage for an event that still has people scratching their heads. 8-year-old Katherine Van Alst was on a summer vacation with her family from Kansas City. She just stepped away from her brothers near a creek and, just like that, walked straight into a mystery that would grip the entire nation. She disappeared without a sound. No struggle, just swallowed by the dense Arkansas wilderness. For 6 agonizing days, hundreds searched that unforgiving terrain, hope dwindling with every hour. And then, as suddenly as she'd vanished, Katherine reappeared. Miles from where she was last seen, and in a state that just defied all logic. Now, this isn't just a story of a lost child who got found. This is an investigation into the inexplicable. How does a young girl with zero survival training, wearing only a bathing suit, last almost a week in a place known for its treacherous paths, hidden dangers, and wild animals? How did she manage to navigate miles of brutal terrain, climbing hundreds of feet in elevation, only to be found in some remote cave? And maybe the most haunting question of all, why did she seem so calm, so composed, with only bits and pieces of memory from her ordeal? Join us as we explore the astonishing case of Katherine Van Alst. We'll look at the facts, sift through the theories, and face those unsettling questions that still hang in the air. Questions that make you rethink everything you thought you knew about survival, human endurance, and the mysteries that can hide just beyond the familiar tree line. The girl who beat Devil's Den didn't just survive. She left behind a legacy of wonder, and a chilling reminder that sometimes the most incredible stories are the ones that just don't have easy answers. June 16th, 1946. It started like any other summer Sunday for the Van Alst family. They'd come down from Kansas City, Missouri, to Devil's Den State Park, looking for that rustic charm and outdoor adventure the Arkansas Ozarks are famous for. The park itself, built up in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, was already a pretty popular spot. People loved its unique rock formations and the cool stone dam that created the peaceful 8-acre Lake Devil. Its 2,500 acres were a mix of dense woods, sharp limestone cliffs, steep hills, and the biggest sandstone crevice cave area in the whole country. Beautiful, yeah, but also pretty treacherous. Archaeologists even say people have been around this area for 8,000 years, which tells you something about its enduring and sometimes formidable nature. Katherine, just 8 years old, was having a fun day with her 2 older brothers, Gene and Bobby. While their mom was making lunch at their cabin and their dad was resting, the kids were down by a creek near a dam that made a little swimming hole. Katherine, barefoot and just in her bathing suit bottoms, was splashing around. Accounts say there was a small incident. Katherine might have slipped into deeper water, and her older brother, maybe with help from a nearby camper, had to pull her out and help her cough up some water. Understandably shaken, or maybe just tired of her brother's fishing, she decided to head back to the family cabin. It wasn't far, a path she probably thought she knew. Her brothers stayed by the water, not too worried at first. It was in those few, seemingly ordinary moments that everything changed. Katherine Van Alst walked away, and then she was just gone. 1 minute, a small figure heading towards what should have been the safety of the cabin. The next vanished, as if the ancient forest itself had just decided to take her. No scream, no cry for help, nothing to suggest anything was wrong. When her brothers eventually went back to the cabin without her, that's when the first wave of panic hit. The initial thought, as it usually is in these situations, was that she'd just wandered off a bit too far or taken a wrong turn on one of the park's many trails. Devil's Den, with its maze of trees, dense undergrowth, and jagged limestone mountains, was certainly a place where you could get turned around pretty easily. Her frantic family started searching right away, their calls echoing through the trees. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and there was still no sign of Katherine, that horrible realization began to sink in. This wasn't just a child who'd momentarily strayed. The authorities were called, and what started as a family's anxious search was about to blow up into one of the largest and most baffling missing person cases Arkansas had ever seen. The wilderness of Devil's Den had claimed its latest enigma. Once word got out that Katherine was missing, a massive search effort kicked into gear. Right off the bat, the rugged, unforgiving nature of Devil's Den State Park was a huge problem. We're talking about roughly 2,500 acres, that's about 10 square kilometers, of dense forest, tons of sandstone caves, steep bluffs, deep ravines, and hilly, mountainous terrain. This was no walk in the park to find a lost child, especially one so young and so unprepared. Remember, Katherine was barefoot, wearing only a bathing suit, completely exposed to the weather, the bugs, and any wildlife she might run into. Hundreds of volunteers, park officials, police, even students from the University of Arkansas, all joined the hunt. They spread out across the landscape, combing through the thick woods, peering into the dark mouths of caves, and carefully making their way over those sharp limestone rocks. Airplanes were brought in, flying low over the treetops, their pilots desperately scanning for any sign of the little girl. A flash of color, a tiny figure, anything. Bloodhounds were deployed, their powerful noses put to the test in an environment just teeming with the smells of the wild. Divers even searched nearby water bodies like the creek and lake devil, just in case the worst had happened and she'd drowned. The searchers were up against the park itself. The terrain was incredibly tough to cover. Steep climbs and drops, loose rocks, and thick bushes that could easily hide a small child. This park had a history, you know. It was a known hideout for outlaws back in the Butterfield stage line days, and later for Confederate guerrillas during the Civil War, precisely because its landscape offered so many places to disappear. And all those caves, some stretching deep into the hillsides like the 550-foot Devil's Den cave, added another layer of difficulty. She could be hidden in any one of them, maybe injured or unable to call out. The Civilian Conservation Corps had built trails, sure, but off those marked paths, the wilderness was dense and seriously disorienting. Days bled into nights, and that initial urgency started to mix with a heavy sense of dread. Every hour that passed made the already slim chances of finding Katherine alive even slimmer. The summer heat, no food or water, the constant threat of exposure, and the sheer psychological toll of being lost and alone. These were all massive dangers for an 8-year-old. Reports from the time paint a picture of growing desperation among her family and the search teams. Her father, John Van Alst, was apparently so overcome by stress and exhaustion that he collapsed at one point. And then there were the puzzling things, or maybe the lack of things. Despite this massive search, there were initially no real traces of Katherine. If the bloodhounds picked up a trail, it wasn't widely reported, or it didn't lead anywhere. Some stories mention that search dogs were confused, or that Katherine herself would later say she saw dogs but was scared of them and hid. This lack of a clear path, of any dropped item or definite sighting, just made the mystery deeper. It was like she'd simply vanished into the thick green of the Ozarks. The park's history whispered of other tragedies. The Pittsburgh Press, when reporting on Katherine's case, mentioned that other people had gotten lost in this rugged area before her and hadn't been so lucky, dying from exhaustion, hunger, and terror. One case involved a woman who wandered for 17 days 2 years earlier before her body was found. Stories like that cast a dark shadow over the search for Katherine. By the 6th day, hope was undeniably fading. The searchers were exhausted, the family was beside themselves, and the authorities were bracing for the worst. The beautiful green of Devil's Den had become a symbol of their desperate and, so far, completely fruitless quest. As the sixth day of that relentless search, Saturday, June 22, 1946, wore on into the afternoon, any real hope for Katherine Van Alst's safe return had shrunk to almost nothing. The hundreds of searchers were bone-tired, and the Ozark wilderness was stubbornly keeping its secret. Then, in a moment that would become legendary in the history of unexplained disappearances, the silence was shattered. A search party, led by a World War II veteran and University of Arkansas student named Porter Chadwick, had pushed into a particularly rugged and remote part of the park. They were about 7 miles, as the crow flies, from where the Van Alst family had camped, though to actually walk that distance over that brutal terrain, it would have been closer to an unbelievable 30 miles. Even crazier, this spot was some 600 feet higher in elevation than where Katherine had last been seen. Chadwick and his group were methodically calling out Katherine's name, their voices echoing through the dense trees and across the rocky bluffs. And suddenly, a small, quiet voice answered. Not a cry of distress, not a wail of fear, but a simple, almost peaceful statement. "Here I am." Following the sound, Chadwick and the others reached a bluff, and there she was, 8-year-old Katherine Van Alst, emerging from the mouth of a cave. She was still wearing the same bathing suit she had on when she disappeared. Porter Chadwick said she even offered a pale smile as he reached her and scooped her up into his arms. Her first words to her rescuer were reported as a calm, "Thank you." Just finding her was a miracle. That a young child could survive for 6 whole days and nights in such a dangerous place, with no food, no proper clothes, and no shelter beyond what she could find, was astounding. But it was the way she was found that immediately started to turn this case from a tragic disappearance with a lucky ending into an enduring puzzle. The location alone was baffling. For an 8-year-old girl, barefoot and alone, to have covered that much ground and climbed that high through dense forest, over sharp rocks, and across uneven ground, it seemed almost impossible. Usually, when kids get lost, they follow the path of least resistance, often heading downhill. Katherine had apparently done the exact opposite, making a tough uphill journey into a remote area. Then there was her behavior. Accounts from her rescuers, including Chadwick, consistently described her as being eerily calm, almost dazed, but remarkably composed for a kid who'd just been through such an ordeal. There were no hysterics, no big outpouring of terror or relief, just a quiet acceptance of her rescue. While she had insect bites and scratches, and newspapers would later mention she looked malnourished, her overall physical condition was reported as surprisingly good, considering everything. Some sources even stressed she was completely unharmed, apart from the bites. That simple phrase, "Here I am," echoed with a strange sort of tranquility. It was as if she'd just been waiting to be found, not like she'd been fighting for her life in a desperate and terrifying situation. The cave she came out of added another layer to the puzzle. Did she find it by chance? How long had she been there? The newspapers said she'd spent 3 nights in that cave. The wonderful news of her discovery spread like wildfire through the search parties and out to a relieved nation. But for those directly involved, and for people who would later look closely at the case, that relief was mixed with a profound sense of bewilderment. Katherine Van Alst was alive, she was safe, but the story of how she survived, where she'd really been, and what she'd experienced in those 6 lost days in Devil's Den was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Once Katherine Van Alst was carried out of that wilderness and reunited with her distraught mother at their cabin, the immediate worry was, of course, her health. Her father, John Van Alst, who'd actually collapsed from the stress earlier in the week, was reportedly recovering at a nearby tourist camp and heard about his daughter's miraculous rescue through a newspaper. He'd later tell the Kansas City Times, "It was truly a miracle that she was found. I believe that God must have been guiding her steps." Katherine was taken to a hospital in Fayetteville for a checkup. Doctors said that considering her 6-day ordeal in the rugged Ozark wilderness wearing only a bathing suit, She was in remarkably good shape. She was covered in insect bites from head to toe and had scratches all over her body. Some newspapers at the time described her as showing the ravages of hunger, emaciated and malnourished. The Kansas City Times noted she was thin and sunburned. Yet, almost contradictorily, or perhaps just highlighting her resilience, other accounts really emphasized how good her condition was and that she hadn't suffered serious harm. She was reportedly started on a light diet, including ice cream, and was said to be running around and in high spirits pretty soon after. One TikTok source, possibly referencing later missing 411 interpretations, mentioned she only needed 2 days of observation in the hospital before being sent home, having lost very little weight and showing few signs of dehydration. Though this does clash a bit with some of those 1946 newspaper accounts of malnutrition. What quickly became clear, and what would really add to the lasting mystery, was Katherine's limited and somewhat strange account of her missing days and nights. She seemed to have very little detailed memory of the entire 6-day period. When asked how she survived, she reportedly said she drank water from a cavern pool or mountain streams and lived on wild berries. Now, the ability of an 8-year-old city girl to correctly identify and eat safe wild berries in a place she didn't know was, in itself, quite remarkable. Though some argue that if you're starving, you might just eat whatever you find and hope for the best. She remembered seeing airplanes, probably the search planes, but had no way to signal them. She also admitted to hearing the baying of the search dogs, but instead of going towards them, she ran and hid, saying she was afraid of them. This fear, while maybe understandable in a frightened child, meant she'd actively avoided a potential rescue at least once. One of the most cryptic and often quoted details from her limited recollections was her statement about her first night lost. She said she had slept in warm grass. What on earth did warm grass mean? That's been a subject of a lot of speculation over the years. Was it just a child's way of describing a sheltered spot in tall grass? Or did it hint at something more unusual, as some of the wilder theories have suggested? Her general demeanor continued to be a source of fascination. Porter Chadwick, the student who found her, noted her calmness. Katherine herself, when later asked if she was scared, reportedly told the United Press, "When they didn't find me in a day or two, I knew then that I was going to die, but still, I wasn't frightened." This extraordinary lack of fear, or at least her professed lack of it, in such a terrible situation, is really hard to wrap your head around, especially for a child. Officially, the main explanation was that Katherine had simply wandered off, gotten lost, and through a mix of luck and maybe some basic survival instinct, managed to find water and berries and shelter in the cave. The distance she traveled and the height she climbed were certainly amazing feats for a child, but perhaps not totally impossible if she was disoriented and desperately trying to find a way out. However, for many, this straightforward explanation just didn't feel like enough. The sheer unlikelihood of her surviving under those specific conditions, the minimal clothing, no shoes, the harsh terrain, her age, and her reported calm and limited memory, all combined to create this aura of the unexplained. The authorities had their rescued girl, the family had their daughter back, but the full story of those 6 days remained locked away, perhaps even from Katherine herself. The immediate aftermath of her discovery solved the urgent question of where she was, but at the same time it opened up a whole flood of new, deeper questions about how she actually survived in the depths of Devil's Den. So, Katherine Van Alst was safe, and as people tried to piece together what happened, the story began to take shape. But it was a story full of holes and things that just didn't quite add up. The simplest, most rational explanation was that Katherine, after wandering off from her brothers, just got lost in the dense, confusing wilderness of Devil's Den State Park. That happens, right? It's a common thing in big wild areas. People who go with this view suggest she then managed to survive by finding shelter, probably in that cave where she was found, drinking water from springs or creeks, and munching on wild berries. Newspaper accounts from 1946 do back up some of this. The St. Louis Dispatch on June 24th reported her saying, "When she grew weary, she would pause by a mountain stream and dangle her swollen, aching feet in the cold water." And the Kansas City Times on June 27th mentioned, After existing 6 days on berries and water, doctors at the city hospital in Fayetteville started her off on ice cream. These details paint a picture of a kid resourcefully, if desperately, finding what she needed. Her claim of sleeping in warm grass on that first night? Well, that could just be her way of saying she found a fairly sheltered and less cold spot in some tall plants. But when you put these rational bits next to the more extreme parts of her case, that explanation starts to feel a bit thin for a lot of folks. The sheer distance she supposedly traveled is a huge sticking point. She was found about 7 miles, as the crow flies, from where she disappeared. But to actually walk that distance over the park's rugged terrain, with its steep hills, thick undergrowth, and rocky bits, she would have had to cover way more ground. Estimates range from a tough 10 miles to an almost unbelievable 30. For an 8-year-old barefoot and in a bathing suit to pull that off, that's an incredible feat of endurance. Her feet were described as swollen and aching, which definitely proves she did a lot of hard walking. Then there's the 600-foot climb in elevation. When people, especially kids, get lost, they often tend to go downhill following streams or easier paths. Katherine was found much higher than where she started, suggesting a grueling uphill trek. Why would a lost, scared kid burn so much energy climbing higher into even more remote territory? Her reported calmness when she was found, and her apparent lack of crippling fear during the whole thing, also makes you wonder. Sure, kids can be surprisingly resilient, but being described as eerily calm and her own statement, "I knew then that I was going to die." But still, I wasn't frightened, are hard to square with the terror you'd expect from being lost, alone, and facing starvation in a wilderness called Devil's Den. Could this calm have been shock or a trauma response? Maybe. But it's still a really striking part of her story. And how did she know which berries were safe to eat? Devil's Den, like any wild area, would have poisonous plants right next to edible ones. For a city kid with no obvious wilderness training to successfully forage for 6 days without getting sick from bad berries seems exceptionally lucky, if not guided by some uncanny intuition. Some argue that if you're starving enough, you might try anything, and she just got lucky. Her limited memory of those 6 days is also a big part of the unexplained story. Traumatic amnesia is a real thing, sure, but the way she remembered certain things, like seeing planes and dogs, drinking water, eating berries, and the warm grass, but seemingly very little else about the long stretches of time, that fuels speculation. Was her memory really that patchy, or was there something she couldn't or wouldn't talk about? David Paulides, who is known for his Missing 411 books and documentaries about strange disappearances in national parks, has pointed to Katherine's case as fitting many of the baffling patterns he sees. Things like the victim being found at a higher elevation, the presence of berries, strange behavior by search dogs, or the victim avoiding them, and the victim being found in an area already searched or incredibly far from where they were last seen. Now, Paulides' work is often controversial and definitely leans towards unexplained, sometimes even paranormal explanations. But the oddities he highlights do resonate with people who find the simple, got lost and survived story a bit lacking. Interestingly, a Reddit user named Brussetnarm did an analysis trying to debunk some of Paulides' claims about the Van Alst case. They argue that newspaper accounts from the time do show she was malnourished and did remember certain things, suggesting the unexplained parts are overblown. For instance, the user points out she did say, "I just couldn't find it, the cabin," and wandered all afternoon going farther and farther afield, which indicates she was simply lost. This kind of perspective is really important for a balanced look, reminding us that even seemingly extraordinary events can sometimes have ordinary if still remarkable explanations. Still, even if you accept the most down-to-earth explanations for each individual thing, the combination of all these factors, the distance, the elevation, the minimal clothing, the child's age, and calm demeanor, her unlikely success finding food, and those fragmented memories, it all adds up to leave you with a lingering sense of wonder and unease. Katherine Van Alst's survival was definitely a triumph of some kind. But the exact nature of that triumph and what forces might have been at play, those remain subjects of endless debate and fascination. The rational explanations give us a framework, but for many, they don't quite capture the haunting inexplicability of the girl who beat Devil's Den. Katherine Van Alst's unsettling story doesn't just stand alone. Devil's Den State Park, aside from its natural beauty, has this reputation steeped in eerie folklore and a history dotted with other unexplained events and disappearances. This background adds another intriguing layer to Katherine's experience, making you wonder if the wilderness she wandered into just has a knack for the mysterious. The name itself, Devil's Den, kind of gives you the shivers, doesn't it? Local legends and visitor stories have helped land the park on lists of the most haunted state parks in the U.S. The park's dramatic scenery, with its deep ravines, shadowy crevices, and ancient forests, naturally lends itself to spooky tales. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the guys who painstakingly built many of the park's structures back in the 1930s, were working in this really evocative setting, a place where Native Americans had lived for thousands of years, and where, later on, outlaws and Civil War guerrillas hid out in its secret spots. All that long human history, layered on top of a wild and sometimes dangerous environment, creates perfect conditions for mystery. Decades after Katherine Van Alst's baffling survival, another notable disappearance brought a grim focus back to Devil's Den. In August 2017, a 33-year-old man named Rodney Letterman went missing while hiking the Butterfield Trail with a friend. Letterman reportedly had high blood pressure and had told his wife he wasn't feeling great before the trip. About a mile from their car, he sat down to rest. His friend hiked back to the car to get medication, but when he returned, Letterman was gone. Despite huge searches covering nearly 4,000 acres with teams on horseback, ATVs, on foot, and with drones, no trace of him was found for a long, long time. His cell phone, charger, and a flashlight were found, some say at a primitive campsite. Tragically, Rodney Letterman's remains weren't discovered until 2 years later, in May 2019, in an area that had supposedly already been searched. The cause of his death was never determined, with some thinking medical issues might have been involved, but the delay in finding him and the circumstances added another sad chapter to the park's story. Beyond documented disappearances, Devil's Den State Park is also the setting for a pretty well-known story in UFO and paranormal circles, the incident at Devil's Den. Research. In 1977, a former USAF medic named Terry Lovelace claimed that he and a friend had a terrifying encounter during a camping trip in the park, an event he later described in detail as an alien abduction. Lovelace's account, published in his book, Incident at Devil's Den, a true story by Terry Lovelace, USAF medic SGT, has become a fixture in UFO lore, further cementing the park's association with high strangeness and the unexplained. Now, claims like these are, by their very nature, hard to prove and often met with a lot of skepticism, but they do add to the overall mystique and unease that surrounds the park for some people. Theories about why these kinds of incidents happen in places like Devil's Den range from the totally ordinary to the highly speculative. The challenging terrain, dense forests, and all those caves definitely pose real, tangible dangers. It's easy to get lost, to fall, or to succumb to the elements if you're not prepared or just unlucky. Search and rescue operations are incredibly difficult in those kinds of environments, but the more folkloric or paranormal theories point to other possibilities, from restless spirits connected to the land's long history, to the idea that certain remote wilderness areas act as window areas for unusual phenomena, or even, as some really controversial theories suggest, that unknown entities or intelligences are involved. Hikers in various national parks, not just Devil's Den, have anecdotally reported hearing strange voices or experiencing unsettling feelings of being watched. While you have to approach tales of the paranormal with a healthy dose of caution, the persistent reputation of Devil's Den as a place where the line between the known and unknown can seem pretty thin adds a compelling, if unsettling, backdrop to Katherine Van Alst's incredible story. Her inexplicable survival, when you look at it against this backdrop of other mysteries and the park's inherent wildness, becomes not just a one-off incident, but part of a larger, more enigmatic pattern associated with this unique corner of the Ozarks. The echoes of these other stories, whether they're factual tragedies like Rodney Letterman's, Or more fringe claims like Lovelace's resonate with the lingering questions about Katherine's 6 lost days, deepening the sense that Devil's Den holds more secrets than it readily gives up. The real heart of the Katherine Van Alst puzzle isn't just that she survived, but how she managed it under conditions that would push even a seasoned outdoorsman to their absolute limits. We're talking about an 8-year-old city kid in nothing but a bathing suit and no shoes, who lasted 6 full days and nights in a rugged wilderness. Let's really dig into the specific things that make her survival so incredibly baffling. First, think about what she was wearing. A simple bathing suit offers almost zero protection. Not from the Ozark nights that can get cool even in June. Not from the scratchy undergrowth and sharp rocks. And definitely not from the constant barrage of insects. Newspaper reports do confirm she was covered in insect bites and scratches from head to toe, being barefoot for 6 days while trekking an estimated 10 to 30 miles of mountainous terrain. That would have been agonizing. Her feet were indeed described as swollen and aching, proof of this brutal journey. The lack of protection against hypothermia, injury, and infection is a massive factor here. Her food and water situation is another area filled with mystery. She reportedly lived on wild berries and water from streams or the cave. As we've talked about, how does an 8-year-old know which berries are safe and which are poisonous in a strange place for 6 straight days without getting sick? It's remarkable, not impossible maybe, but it suggests an extraordinary amount of luck or some kind of unexplainable intuition. Dehydration would have been a huge risk too, though finding water sources like streams and that cave pool would have helped if she drank enough. However, some accounts suggest she wasn't severely dehydrated when they found her. And then there's that infamous warm grass comment she made about her first night. Sure, it could just be a kid's simple way of describing a somewhat sheltered spot. But that phrase has really captured the imagination of people who suspect something more unusual was going on. Could it refer to an animal's den? Unlikely, given the dangers. Some of the more out there theories, often linked to missing 411 lore, have wondered if it hinted at some unknown helper, maybe even a cryptid like Bigfoot, providing warmth or shelter, though that's way out in the realm of pure guesswork and has zero concrete evidence. It's a detail that, because it's so vague and Katherine didn't say more, remains an open question, just fueling imaginative ideas. The cleanliness of her clothes, or rather, her bathing suit, is a detail sometimes mentioned in similar unexplained disappearance cases. Though specific, verifiable reports on the state of Katherine's bathing suit, beyond it just being what she was wearing, are pretty scarce in the main research for this case. If her bathing suit was found to be unusually clean after 6 days in the wilderness, that would definitely add another layer of confusion. But without strong contemporary sources for this specific detail in Katherine's case, it's just speculation. What about human help? Could she have run into someone in the woods who helped her, but whom she later couldn't remember or describe? Devil's Den does have a history of being a hideout. While it's a possibility, no evidence ever popped up to suggest that happened, and it would make you ask why this helper didn't bring her to safety sooner or let anyone know they were there. Her journey itself just defies an easy explanation. The sheer physical endurance an 8-year-old would need to travel so far, over such tough terrain, and climb 600 feet in elevation is immense. Was she driven by a desperate, disoriented panic? Or was there some other unknown factor guiding her movements? Her calm demeanor when she was found seems so out of sync with a child who'd just been through such a physically and emotionally draining, panic-fueled flight. Her apparent lack of severe trauma is also puzzling. While she was undoubtedly affected by what happened, her reported composure and her statement that she was not frightened, even when she thought she might die, are extraordinary. Kids usually aren't equipped to handle that kind of extreme isolation and danger with such calm. Could it be a coping mechanism? A form of disassociation? Or does it hint at an experience that was somehow different from what we might imagine? The cave where she was found, where she reportedly spent 3 nights, offered shelter. But how did she find it? Was it by pure chance? Or was she somehow led there? The fact that it had fresh water was absolutely crucial for her survival. Ultimately, when you try to piece together the how of Katherine's survival, you're left with more questions than answers. Each rational explanation for individual bits of her survival, finding berries, drinking water, seeking shelter, is plausible on its own. But the cumulative effect of her overcoming so many challenges, the extreme distances and elevation, her young age and lack of preparedness, her puzzling calm, and her fragmented memory, all combine to create a scenario that really stretches the limits of an ordinary explanation. It's this combination of factors that makes her story not just a tale of survival, but a lasting, haunting investigation into the limits of human possibility and the mysteries that the wilderness can still hold. A really significant and deeply perplexing part of the Katherine Van Alst case is what she remembered, or rather, what she didn't remember, about those 6 terrifying days. Here's an 8-year-old child who goes through an experience that would be unimaginably awful for most adults, yet she comes out with only these fragmented, almost dreamlike bits of memory from her time lost in the vastness of Devil's Den. This silence of Katherine, her inability to give a clear, detailed story of what happened, is a cornerstone of the mystery and has fueled decades of speculation. So, what did she actually recall? Accounts say she remembered being thirsty and drinking water from streams and a pool in the cave. She remembered eating berries. She remembered seeing the search planes overhead but having no way to signal them. Crucially, she remembered hearing the search dogs, and instead of being drawn to the sound of potential rescue, she actively avoided them because she was scared. And of course, there's that enigmatic statement about sleeping in warm grass on her first night. Beyond these specific, somewhat isolated moments, the hours and days in between seem to have been a blur, or maybe just a blank. There's no detailed account of how she felt emotionally during that long period, other than her later, almost detached statement that she knew she might die but wasn't scared. There's no clear timeline of where she went, no explanation for how she navigated that treacherous terrain to end up 7 miles away and 600 feet higher. One of the most common psychological explanations for these kinds of memory gaps after a traumatic event is dissociative amnesia. Trauma can make the mind block out experiences that are just too overwhelming to handle. It's like a protective mechanism, walling off the conscious mind from the full impact of terror, pain, or extreme stress. For an 8-year-old kid, lost, alone, hungry, and facing the very real possibility of death, the ordeal would undoubtedly have been profoundly traumatic. It's entirely plausible that her mind shielded her by erasing large chunks of the experience. The calmness she showed when she was rescued could also be seen this way, as a form of emotional numbing or shock. However, it's the selective nature of her memory that some people find particularly intriguing. Why remember the warm grass, but not how she found the cave that sheltered her for 3 nights? Why recall avoiding the dogs, but not the long, exhausting journey that took her so far from where she started? Could it be that her memories weren't totally erased, but were just difficult for a child to explain in a way that adults could fully understand? A child's perception of time, distance, and danger is different from an adult's. Her story might have been filtered through an 8-year-old's understanding, making it seem fragmented or illogical to the adults who were questioning her. Then you have the more speculative interpretations, the ones that go beyond standard psychology. Some who lean towards theories of paranormal intervention or encounters with unknown entities suggest that her memory loss, or the strange nature of her recollections, might point to an experience outside the realm of the ordinary. In this view, the amnesia isn't just a result of trauma, but maybe a part of the mysterious event itself, memories deliberately hidden or altered. Theories like these, while definitely compelling to some, don't have any real evidence and rely heavily on guesswork. It's also worth thinking about the impact of the rescue itself and all the attention that followed. Being the focus of so much intense relief and curiosity could have influenced how she processed and talked about her experience. The desire to please, or maybe just not being able to meet the unspoken expectation for a dramatic survival story, might have played a role in her quiet responses. Ultimately, Katherine Van Alst took the full story of those 6 days with her, locked away somewhere in her mind. Her limited recall means that the most important witness to what happened can't give a complete testimony. This silence, whether it's a product of trauma, the the limitations of childhood perception, or something else entirely, ensures that the heart of the mystery, what truly happened to Katherine in Devil's Den, remains just out of reach. It transforms the case from a straightforward survival story into a psychological puzzle, where the missing pieces aren't just physical clues in the wilderness, but fragments of a child's lost memory. The questions about her inner world during that week are just as haunting as the questions about her physical journey. While Katherine Van Alst's story is often told with an air of deep mystery, especially in circles that focus on unexplained phenomena, it's really important to look at the skeptical viewpoints and the more ordinary explanations that have been put forward over the years. A truly thorough investigation means considering these counter-arguments, which try to bring the seemingly inexplicable parts of the case back down to earth with rational, if still remarkable, explanations. One of Katherine's own statements, reported in the Nebraska State Journal on June 24, 1946, gives a simple reason for how she got lost. The child had been missing since Monday when she lost her way returning from a creek to their park cabin. "I just couldn't find it," she said. Similarly, the dispatch from the same day said, "She went for a stroll near her parents' vacation camp, took the wrong path, and before she knew it, found herself hopelessly lost in a maze of trees, dense undergrowth, and jagged limestone mountains." These reports from the time suggest a pretty straightforward scenario. A kid took a wrong turn and got disoriented in a tough environment. That Reddit user Brassetnarm, in a detailed look at the case, specifically challenges some of the claims made by David Paulides and the missing 411 narrative. This user argues that Paulides might have cherry-picked certain details or left others out to fit his pre-existing pattern of strange disappearances. For example, the idea that Katherine couldn't remember what happened is contradicted by newspaper accounts where she clearly recalls things like seeing planes, hearing dogs, drinking water from streams, and eating berries. While her memory was patchy, it wasn't a total blank. The issue of her physical condition is another point where people disagree. While some accounts emphasize her being remarkably healthy or unharmed, the skeptical view points to numerous 1946 newspaper reports stating she was emaciated, malnourished, and suffering from the ravages of hunger and insect bites. The Kansas City Times on June 27, 1946 noted, "The only ill effects of her experience apparently were bites, scratches, and malnutrition. Last night she was running around and apparently in high spirits. She still is thin." This paints a picture of a child who clearly suffered physically but was resilient, rather than miraculously untouched by her ordeal. The idea that she only needed 2 days in the hospital and showed little sign of dehydration or weight loss, as sometimes suggested in more modern retellings, might not line up perfectly with these first-hand reports of malnutrition. The distance she traveled and the height she climbed, while extreme, aren't seen as impossible by skeptics, but rather as an astonishing feat of endurance for a lost and frightened child. A child in a panic, or just desperately trying to find a way out, might wander much farther than you'd expect, and not always in a logical direction. The claim that rescuers said she would have had to walk between 24 to 36 miles is noted as disputed, and everyone acknowledges that the exact distance will never be known. Her swollen feet definitely show she did a significant amount of walking. As for knowing which berries were safe, the skeptical take is that a starving child might eat whatever they find, and Katherine was either lucky, or maybe had some prior, even brief familiarity with common berries. It doesn't necessarily require a supernatural explanation. Even her reported calmness could be chalked up to shock, exhaustion, or just a child's unique way of processing extreme events, rather than being a sign of something paranormal. Her fear of the dogs, which made her avoid searchers, is also a documented behavior in some lost children who are taught to fear strangers, or are simply frightened by all the noise and commotion. The argument from skeptics isn't necessarily that Katherine's survival wasn't incredible. It certainly was. Instead, they argue that the circumstances, when you look at them through the lens of reports from the time and rational explanations for child behavior and survival, don't automatically point to an inexplicable or paranormal event. They suggest that the narrative of high strangeness might have been amped up over time, especially as the story has been retold and included in collections of unexplained mysteries. This perspective is vital. It reminds us that extraordinary things can and do happen without needing to venture into the supernatural. Katherine Van Alst's ordeal was undeniably a testament to human, and specifically child, resilience. Whether you see it as a straightforward, albeit extreme case of getting lost and found, or as a genuinely inexplicable mystery, depends largely on how you weigh the known facts against the still puzzling elements. The counter-arguments help to balance the more sensational aspects, urging a focus on what can be reasonably figured out from the evidence, while still acknowledging the profound and harrowing experience of a little girl lost in Devil's Den. The truth likely lies somewhere in the mix of remarkable chance, a child's unexpected strength, and the inherent wildness of the place she faced. So, what do you think happened to Katherine Van Alst? Was her survival a miracle of resilience, a string of lucky breaks, or is there a deeper mystery still lurking in the shadows of Devil's Den? We'd love to hear your theories and thoughts, so drop them in the comments section below. And if you find these kinds of unsolved mysteries and perplexing survivals as fascinating as we do, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the unexplained. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next investigation. Your support really helps us keep exploring these incredible stories. The story of Katherine Van Alst, the 8-year-old girl who wandered into the depths of Devil's Den State Park in 1946 and walked out 6 days later, is still one of the most compelling and debated survival tales of the 20th century. Dressed only in a bathing suit with no shoes or supplies, she faced the raw, untamed wilderness of the Ozarks, a land of dense forests, treacherous ravines, and hidden caves. Her discovery, miles from where she vanished and much higher up, was itself a huge relief and absolutely astonishing. But it was the details around her reappearance, her inexplicable calm, her fragmented memories, the sheer unlikelihood of her surviving unaided against such overwhelming odds, that have truly cemented her story in the annals of the unexplained. We've looked at the rational explanations. A child gets lost, disoriented, but manages to survive through luck, and a basic will to live, finding water in streams, food in berries, and shelter in a cave. These ideas do account for many of the facts, yet for so many people, they just don't quite capture the profound strangeness of what happened. That immense distance covered by a barefoot child, her unusual lack of crippling fear, the cryptic warm grass, and the enduring questions about what really went on during those 144 lost hours. Was it simply an extraordinary, though perhaps explainable, feat of endurance? Was her survival helped by factors we still don't know, or maybe can never know? Did the trauma of it all just erase the most terrifying parts from her young mind, leaving only disconnected images? Or does the wild heart of Devil's Den, a place with its own history of shadows and whispers, hold a deeper secret about Katherine's ordeal? Katherine Van Alst's case is a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, especially in a child. It also highlights the enduring power of mystery, the way certain stories can grab our collective imagination, precisely because they don't have easy answers. The questions surrounding her 6 days in the wilderness are as haunting today as they were back in 1946. Katherine Van Alst beat Devil's Den. She walked out of that cave and back into the world, leaving behind a legacy of bewildered wonder. And even though decades have passed, the enigma of her survival endures, a quiet testament to an experience that continues to whisper of the profound and often inexplicable boundary between the world we know and the wild unknown. What really happened to the girl in the bathing suit? Perhaps only the ancient stones and silent trees of Devil's Den will ever truly know.